Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, episode 8. I spent the weekend building Harry Potter Lego sets with my boyfriend and binge watching the new season of The Crown. We just recently finished What We Do in the Shadows, and I really wish they would make more episodes. It's such a great show, but it's also supposed to be really cold in Austin this coming week, and I am not looking forward to it at all. I hate the cold weather. And yeah, that's pretty much all for my little weekly recap. I hope you guys enjoyed your weekend, and let's get into today's case. I do also want to give a warning that this case is very brutal. It has been labeled as one of the worst cases in Indianapolis. Viewer discretion is advised. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949 in Lebanon, Indiana, to Lester and Elizabeth Likens. She had 4 siblings. Diana and Daniel were an older set of twins, and the other 2, Jenny and Benny, were a younger set of twins. Because all of her siblings were twins, she often felt alone and grew to be independent. Sylvia loved spending her time roller skating and listening to the Beatles. Her family nicknamed her Cookie when she was a young girl. She had a gorgeous smile, but she didn't think so because she was missing one tooth in the front from an accident with her brother. Sylvia's little sister Jenny had a limp leg due to polio, and Sylvia always took care of her. Her parents struggled financially with their 5 kids. They were both working for the carnival, which meant they weren't always able to be home. Her father only had an 8th grade education and often switched between jobs, but ultimately decided to stay with the carnival. Sylvia's parents made it known that they needed someone to watch the 2 girls, because the 2 brothers would be with their grandparents and the other daughter was married and lived with her husband. A woman named Gertrude Benezuski was introduced to them through a mutual friend. At the time, however, she was going by the name Gertrude Wright. This was because that was her most recent boyfriend's last name. He was serving in the army in Germany. It's important to note that she had previously been through multiple marriages due to physical abuse. She also had severe depression that she treated with heavy doses of prescription drugs. She had a total of 7 children ranging from 18 months to 17 years old. That's a lot of kids for anyone to be taken care of on their own. Bringing in 2 more seems like way too much for one person. She had very little child support coming in from her previous husband, and she would occasionally iron clothing for people, but it wasn't enough to take care of her whole family. The rented house they lived in allowed 2 more people to stay, and she saw this as a way to make more income. Her and Sylvia's family decided to send Gertrude $20 a week to take care of the girls, but her parents would soon deeply regret this decision. During the first 2 weeks of their stay, everything seemed to be fine. The only issue was that Gertrude's daughter, 17-year-old Paula, didn't like Sylvia and often got into arguments with her. Because of this ongoing conflict, Gertrude grew to hate Sylvia more and more and treated her sister Jenny a little better than her. Months later, in October of 1965, the payment her parents sent didn't arrive on time. This infuriated Gertrude. She immediately grabbed both of the girls and took them upstairs. She then spit and slapped them both and said, quote, "I took care of you 2 bitches for 2 weeks for nothing." She then dragged only Sylvia into another room and closed the door behind her. Her sister Jenny would recall hearing her sister screaming, but she didn't know what was going on. Just one day later, the money arrived, but this didn't stop the abuse and torture. In fact, it only got worse after this. Anything the 2 girls did bothered Gertrude. Even when they were simply recycling bottles for change at the store, Gertrude would beat them with a paddle and a thick leather belt. The belt was one that belonged to her ex-husband, who was a cop. Unfortunately, it didn't matter what the girls did, because she would always find small things to get angry about in order to continue the abuse. One time, she suspected that Sylvia stole something from her, and she decided to burn her fingertips with matches. Gertrude would beat the girls so badly that she would become exhausted after. This resulted in Gertrude telling her daughter, Paula, to join in and take over. Paula began to abuse the girls, but soon focused only on Sylvia. Unfortunately, not too long after, Gertrude would demand Sylvia's sister, Jenny, to also join in on her torture. Gertrude would threaten her until she finally caved and began abusing her sister. On another occasion, Gertrude brought Sylvia to a church event and force-fed her hot dogs until she began to vomit. When Sylvia vomited, Gertrude would get even angrier and force Sylvia to eat her own throw-up. I wish I could tell you that the abuse would soon end, but it would only get worse over time. Gertrude would get all of her children to abuse Sylvia and Jenny. They would practice karate on her, put cigarettes out on her skin, slam her into walls and floors, throw her down the stairs, and worst of all, they would cut open her skin and pour salt into the open wounds. After, they would put her in scorching hot bath water in order to quote-unquote cleanse her. They believed she was evil and needed to be cleansed in order to return to normal. Another form of torture would involve Gertrude giving sermons on the evils of sexual immorality. In other words, she made it seem like Sylvia was participating in sexual acts outside of marriage. Paula would stomp on Sylvia's vagina, and this is the oddest part of the case because Paula was currently pregnant and actually accused Sylvia of being pregnant also. This led her to mutilate her private parts. Gertrude would soon invite kids that lived in the neighborhood over to watch and participate. There were over a dozen kids that took part in her abuse. There were many other horrible things that happened, including Gertrude's 12-year-old son forcing Sylvia to lick his younger siblings' dirty diapers until they were clean. Her fingernails were also broken backwards. She was starved, raped, beaten, and burned over and over again. All of this abuse would cause Sylvia to bite through her lips. Sylvia was also forced to strip naked and shove a Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina while all of Gertrude's kids and kids that lived in the neighborhood watched. The beatings would occur after she got home from school, but soon she would stop her from accessing the world altogether. The abuse began to take a large toll on Sylvia's health. She wasn't able to use the bathroom normally and often wet the bed she slept on. This angered Gertrude even more. She decided to lock 16-year-old Sylvia in her basement. She didn't have access to a bathroom or food. This resulted in Sylvia eating out of a trash can and using the restroom on herself. Even though she locked her away, the abuse still continued and only got worse. Gertrude would invite neighborhood kids and her kids' friends over to participate in the abuse. She would also make up stories and spread lies about Sylvia in order to anger the kids. In one instance, she lied to her daughter and said that Sylvia called her a whore. This led her to invite her friends over to gang up on Sylvia and beat her. Later on, it is revealed that a teenage girl named Anna was recruited to beat Sylvia and kick her. Gertrude would tell Anna that Sylvia had been saying that her mother slept around with random men for just $5. Anna didn't ask others if this is true. She also didn't ask Sylvia if she ever said that. Instead, she went to the home and threw Sylvia to the ground and began kicking and beating her. Gertrude would then come up with another horrible lie about Sylvia. She would tell her kids that she was a prostitute. After doing so, she invited an 11-year-old boy named Richard Hobbs over. He was one of the kids that lived in the neighborhood. She would tell him and her daughter, Marie, to carve, "I'm a prostitute and I'm proud of it," into her abdomen with a hot needle. I'm now going to play audio of Richard describing this incident. You'll also hear Gertrude try and say something else happened.
The following is an excerpt from a 1965 newscast in which Bob Hoover spoke with Richard Hobb, who explained what he did to the girl.
All I did was write out that thing in her stomach, and I hit her about 10 or 15 times.
How come?
Well, mostly because Gertie told me to.
Hoover then spoke to one of the Baniszewski children, who told him how the victim was treated.
She refused food. We tried to give her soup every once in a while and stuff like that, and she wouldn't take it.
But how about these scratch marks on her stomach? Who put them on her?
I did.
Why?
Well, Gertie just thought of it. She said, since you branded us, we're going to brand you. So she itched in her with a pen, and I went over it. She showed me how to do it, and I went over it. I did it.
Did you ever use any hot irons on her?
No. Yeah, that 3 in her stomach, I did half of that. And Shirley Ann did the other half.
Where'd the S come from?
What do you mean?
There's a big S branded on her stomach, wrestled or one of her breasts.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's what you're talking about. But how about the inscription on there, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it"? Who put that on?
I did.
Did you scratch it on there, paint it on there? How'd you do it?
Well, like I said before, Gertie wrote it down there with a pen, and I did the rest. She showed me how to do it.
Had Gertie abused this girl?
Gertrude Baniszewski, however, had a different story.
I did never beat that girl. Never. She was beat up on by other girls. In fact, my own daughter stopped her in the jaw and broke her wrist. And so, I mean, there you go. And girls around the neighborhood beat her up, bloodied her nose. One girl broke her nose, in fact, I think.
Were you ever in contact with the police on any of these occasions?
Well, in the last 2 weeks, in fact, I think if he'd talked to my daughters, I'd ask them that the children's father and I are divorced. And he's a policeman in Beachcomber, was. And I've asked the girls repeatedly to call their dad and ask him what to do. And in fact, I asked Jenny, I said, Jenny, and I told Sylvia, I said, Sylvia, I'm going to have to call the police or somebody because I can't have any responsibility.
But the police were called only one time, and according to Hobb,
Well, I'll come in about, she come up from the basement, and we noticed she was cold and everything, so we carried her upstairs. give her a warm bath and artificial respiration. Well, she stopped breathing. See, we gave her a warm bath, and then she stopped breathing. So I gave her artificial respiration for about 10 minutes. And then I went and called the police.
I could not imagine being just 16 and dealing with these painful punishments. Not just mentally, but physically. Gertrude noticed not too long after that Sylvia looked as if she were dying. In a quick attempt to cover up the abuse, she forced Sylvia to write a note stating that she had run away and was beaten by a gang of boys after engaging in sexual acts with them. The letter would read, "To Mom and Dad, I went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I would give them something, so I got in the car and they all got what they wanted. And when they finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body. And they also put on my stomach, 'I am a prostitute and proud of it.' I have done just about everything that I could do just to make Gertie mad and cause Gertie more money than she's got. I've tore up a new mattress and peed on it. I have also cost Gertie doctor bills that she really can't pay and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all her kids." Gertrude's original plan was to blindfold her, leave her body in the woods, and attach this note to her. However, Sylvia tried to run away after hearing Gertrude tell her kids what her plan was. She managed to get out through the front door but was stopped by Gertrude and one of the neighborhood boys named Coy. It's worth mentioning that after all 3 months of suffering, she wasn't able to move most of her body. So the fact that she was able to make it that far before they caught her is truly a miracle. They then beat her with a curtain rod until she became unconscious, because she told them that she wasn't able to swallow anymore. When she was slowly gaining consciousness again, Gertrude stomped on her head. After, Gertrude realized she was looking even worse than before and decided to bring her crackers. Sylvia, however, didn't want them. She would tell Gertrude to give it to the dog because it was hungrier than she was. The very next day, on October 24th, Gertrude and John beat her again. She swung a chair at her, but the chair broke before reaching her. She then tried to hit Sylvia with the same paddle she used before, but accidentally hit herself instead and blackened her own eye. Coy, one of the neighborhood boys mentioned earlier, then hit her with a broomstick on her head, which knocked her unconscious once more. Throughout the night, it is later revealed that Sylvia hit the floor with a shovel multiple times. Neighbors would recall being disturbed by this sound and thought about calling the cops, but eventually decided not to. The following day, Sylvia was given a bath fully clothed. When Gertrude's kids began to get her out, they noticed she wasn't breathing. They began trying to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but it wasn't working. Sylvia unfortunately succumbed to her injuries on October 26, 1965. Her cause of death would later be revealed to be due to swelling of the brain, internal hemorrhaging of the brain, and shock due to the extensive skin damage. She also suffered from extreme malnutrition, as she was only occasionally given water and crackers to eat. It would later be revealed that Sylvia knew she was going to die. She told her sister just 3 days before her death, quote, "I'm going to die, I can tell." Gertrude told one of the kids to call the cops. He would walk to the nearest payphone in order to do this because her home didn't have one. When the police arrived, they could see Sylvia was brutally beaten with over 150 injuries. The message carved into her stomach was exposed, and she was lying dead on the mattress. Gertrude gave them the letter she forced Sylvia to write in an attempt to clear her name, but before the officers could even read the letter, Sylvia's sister Jenny would whisper to them, quote, "Get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." The police then arrested Gertrude, her daughter Paula, and her son John for murder. 2 of the neighborhood kids, Richard and Coy, were also charged with the murder, while the others, including Mike Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene McGuire, Judy Duke, and Anna Cisco, were only charged with injury to person. In court, a lot of the neighborhood kids admitted to their actions, but said Gertrude told them to do it. This would result in their charges being dropped. During the trial, Gertrude's pregnant daughter Paula would be sent to the hospital to birth her child. Oddly, she decided to name her daughter Gertrude. The prosecution was seeking the death penalty for all of the accused, and a lot of people assumed they would get it. At this time, the death penalty in Indiana was carried out by the electric chair. In a weird confession, Gertrude's son, John, would tell a reporter that he loved being on trial. He would also say, quote, "I took a kind of delight in it. What I really wanted was love, but I took the attention instead." The judge for this case was Saul Rabb. Gertrude was represented by William Ehrbecker. Paula was represented by George Rice, and John was represented by Forrest Bowman. None of these lawyers were paid. The only one that was paid was James G. Nediff, and he represented one of the neighborhood boys, Richard. One of the other neighborhood boys, named Coy, was represented by Joseph Quill. Joseph, however, quit after just a week, and John's lawyer, Forrest Bowman, took over his case. The prosecution team was led by Leroy New and assisted by Deputy Prosecutor Marjorie Wessner. It's important to note that in this time, women lawyers were rarely used. This was the perfect case for one to be used since there were child defendants and an older woman involved. The star witness would of course be Sylvia's sister Jenny. She would be choked up while speaking and often cried when detailing all she and her sister endured. When she was asked why she didn't get help, she responded that she was terrified to. Gertrude would always beat her and threaten her by saying if she told anyone, she would do the same thing she did to Sylvia to her. It's important to also note that Jenny is also just a little girl. Gertrude would lie on the stand and say she was too sick and chronically tired to partake in all of the abuse. In fact, she would even go as far as saying her kids were the ones that did everything to Sylvia behind her back. She also tried to plead insanity. All she would admit to was slapping Sylvia's hand when she misbehaved, but even then she was too weak to and told her daughter to do it. Later, she would testify in a way that shocked prosecutors. She seemed to be testifying against Sylvia as if it were her fault. In one story, she brought up her sexual conduct, which once again is a lie. According to Gertrude, one day, Darlene McGuire came to her house. This wasn't random because she would often visit her kids. When Gertrude answered the door, however, she was asked where she could find Sylvia because she saw that she was out with her husband. Gertrude would say Darlene brought Sylvia over and told her she found her, and this was how she said she first came in contact with Sylvia. In another story, Gertrude would say that Sylvia had asked her father if she could live with her, to which Gertrude responded, quote, "No, I could not take care of you children. I have too many of my own and too many worries and too many responsibilities without adding any more." Apparently, Sylvia then said, "Well, we can take care of ourselves. We are used to that." Sylvia would then go to her father and say, "Daddy, you could pay her for letting us stay here." Gertrude would tell the prosecutor that Sylvia rebelled often. Their conversation goes as follows. For this conversation, I'm going to say G for Gertrude and P for prosecutor. G. She would not do anything I told her. No. P. She was disobedient. G. She would not mind me. No. P. Did you whip her for that? G. I believe I testified I whipped her, or tried to one time. P. How many times was she disobedient to you? G. I told you, she would not mind me at all. P. How many times? G. I think I answered your question. I said she would not mind me at all. P. Ever? G. Not that I can recall. Gertrude's 11-year-old daughter Marie would then take to the stand. She began to cry and said, quote, "I'm here to testify to see if my mom killed Sylvia Likens." She would then say that she had seen her mom hit her, but only when she was bad. She never recalled seeing her get kicked, burned, or mistreated. She would also say her mom was always in bed and that the neighborhood kids would abuse Sylvia. The next day, she would tell the prosecutor that she was nervous. She would be asked about the day Sylvia had been branded. She would say her 10-year-old sister Shirley did it, and not too long after, she would shout, "Oh God, help me." Then the witness for the defense turned into one for the prosecution. Marie had heated the needle. Her mother had been there and started the tattoo. She had seen Mom burn Sylvia and beat her. She had heard her mother order Sylvia down to the basement. Defense attorney William Ehrbecker would rely on Gertrude's mental incompetence and say he condemns her for being a murderess, but that she isn't responsible simply because she isn't all there. He then pointed to his head. The other defense attorneys would try and put the blame onto Gertrude because she was a grown woman and the other accused were too young to make responsible decisions. Prosecutor Leroy New would make an impassioned plea for the death penalty for all of the accused. He would say, quote, "The issue here is law and order. Will we allow such acts? Will we allow such brutality on a human being? If you go below the death penalty in this case, you will lower the value of human life by that much for each defendant." However, when the verdicts came back, only Gertrude would be convicted of first-degree murder, and surprisingly, she was not sentenced to death. Her own lawyer would say, quote, "In my opinion, she ought to go to the electric chair." She appealed and was given a new trial. She was once again convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Her daughter Paula was convicted of second-degree murder, and she also appealed and was given a new trial before she passed it up and pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. Interestingly, she once managed to escape prison but was soon recaptured. She was released after only a few years. Stephanie, Gertrude's other daughter, was also able to get her charges dropped. The neighborhood kids, including Anna, Judy, Randy, Lepper, and Mike, also got their charges dropped. Gertrude's son John and the two neighborhood kids Coy and Richard were convicted on manslaughter. They only spent 18 months in a juvenile detention center. Unfortunately, Gertrude was granted parole on good behavior on December 4th, 1985. She only served 20 years in prison. It has been rumored that she was released early not because of good behavior, but because of a cover-up within the prison. There had been many women coming forward saying that guards were raping them and getting them pregnant. I'm now going to play audio of Thomi Elmore, a woman that challenged the Indiana Parole Board.
It was like, oh, I think something's going on that we don't really know about. We did find out later there had been sexual abuse of prisoners in the prison, of women, and that there were several women prisoners that had subsequently become pregnant. There was a case against some of the guards. Their key witness in that case for the Department of Corrections was Gertrude Braniszewski. So our feeling was they told her that if she testified, she would have this early release. I don't have 100% proof of that, but my thinking is when we became aware that this has been a fact, because you can research that there was a case like that, and she was the witness for the Department of Corrections, it just leads you to believe that she was being good, she was doing the things that she needed to do, and the parole came up and she was to be released. I don't know if Gertrude was repentant or not. That wasn't really where I was coming from. I was just coming from the point that there are all these voices that say 20 years is not enough time for the life of that one child. Because to me, and I think this speaks to most of us in society, a child's life is the most valuable thing. And people need to speak up for that.
When Gertrude was released, she cried and asked for forgiveness. Sylvia's sister Jenny, along with other protesters, however, decided to protest her release outside of the prison, but unfortunately this didn't change anything. Gertrude said she didn't remember her role in Sylvia's murder and that she didn't want to be released. She said, quote, "I've lived with this for 20 years, and to know that you're responsible for taking someone's life is real hard to live with. This is not a victory for me. I just wish, people would please forgive me. I can't undo anything. I know that the Lord has forgiven me. I have my peace inside, and I still have to live with this every day, and it's terrible." She would also say that she wouldn't be able to see her family or her innocent grandchildren because her publicity would harm them. Instead, she wanted to use her experience to minister others. Just 5 years after she was released, she died of lung cancer, which felt like relief to Sylvia's sister Jenny. She would later write a note to her mom saying, "Damn old Gertrude died. Ha 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 ha. I'm happy about that." She also went on to say that she didn't blame her parents for the whole thing. Quote, "My mom was a really good mom. All she did was trust Gertrude." Gertrude's son John would later resurface. He had since changed his name to John Blake. After the shooting in Jonesboro, Arkansas, he decided to speak with reporters and say that young murderers can change their lives around. He also spoke about Sylvia's death publicly, saying he wasn't sure why he and his neighbors did this to her. He assumed it was due to his anger over his parents splitting and the struggle to get food and clothing. He would also say that he felt his punishment was inadequate for what he did. Quote, "A more severe punishment would have been just." He also stated he was a changed man because he found God. This is a typical narcissistic approach to this type of situation. People often claim they are now good people because they are involved with their church, but in reality, this is all a cover-up. It's important to note that him and his family went to a fundamentalist church growing up before and after they abused the Likens girls. Since his release, he hasn't had any run-ins with the law. He worked as a truck driver, a realtor, and even served as a lay pastor. He also got married and had 3 children. He has diabetes and his vision is blurry. He needs a cane or a walker in order to move around. Gertrude's other daughter, Stephanie, moved to Florida and oddly became a school teacher. She also got married and had kids. The other daughter, Paula, moved to Iowa and also became a school teacher. She had since changed her name to Paula Pace and worked for the BCLUQ school district in Conrad, Iowa since 1998. She also did custodial work and worked as a teacher's aide for special needs students, which is very scary to think about considering how she treated Sylvia. Soon, however, her childhood secret would be revealed. Her true identity was being circulated around Facebook, and police were notified by an anonymous tipster. The person told the cops they needed to look into her background. The police notified the school she worked at, and when they began doing background checks, her mugshot and birthday revealed she was one of the daughters that killed Sylvia Likens. The superintendent called her to the office, and Paula admitted that everything was true. She was suspended, and after a board meeting, it was decided that she was to be fired immediately. There hasn't been any update as to what happened to Paula. Sylvia's sister Jenny got married and enrolled in a Job Corps program in 1966 and later got a job in a bank. Her parents, Lester and Elizabeth, got divorced in 1967. Elizabeth died in 1999. She was 71 years old. Her keepsakes box revealed an old yellow newspaper clipping of Gertrude's obituary, along with the note that Jenny wrote to her saying Gertrude had finally died. Her twin brother Benny began showing signs of severe mental illness just a few years after Sylvia's death and was diagnosed as schizophrenic. At the time of Sylvia's death, he was only 15. He went on to serve in the Army and after worked in different restaurants as a cook. He was hearing voices and became very antisocial. He died just 4 months after his mom at the age of 49. Their father Lester became aware of his death after a letter he sent him was returned to him and labeled as deceased. Sylvia has never been forgotten. A memorial has been made for her in Willard Park. The poem on the stone is written by movie maker Ivan Rogers and reads, "I see a light, hope. I feel a breeze, strength. I hear a song, relief. Let them through, for they are the welcome ones." The city spent 10 years and over $1.8 million restoring this park and bringing new trees, a walking trail, and sports fields to it. Police Detective Tom Rogers would say that the memorial is not meant to be gloomy. It's something to be happy about. He says it's a reminder for others to be vigilant for children. This park was chosen because it was close to her high school, her grandma's house, and the house where she died. He believed she may have even gone to play here before. There are many theories as to why Gertrude committed such evil acts, especially because she had her own kids that had normal childhoods, except for financial struggles, but there haven't been any answers. Was she simply just jealous of Sylvia because she was beautiful and bubbly? Regardless, this whole case is absolutely heartbreaking, and Sylvia's whole family was deeply affected by this. Corruption within the system, specifically in cases of child abuse, never failed to shock me. I hope that Sylvia knows how loved she was, especially by millions of strangers that never got to meet her, but protest for her every day. There will never be any form of justice that could make up for what happened to her. If you or anyone you know is experiencing any form of abuse, please contact your local abuse hotline or notify someone to do it for you. No one should ever have to experience this. All case information, evidence, and photos will be available in the show notes as always. Feel free to follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast or my personal one at Annalisa. Thank you so much for your continuous support, and I hope to see you on the next one.